Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're going to be studying the 5 Precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. This is where you're learning about 5 impactful decisions that you could make wisely that are going to produce wholesome results, or unwisely that's going to produce unwholesome results. This is part of the wisdom that you would need in order to make your way to enlightenment. Because remember, getting to this enlightened mind where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy is to arise wisdom in the mind and apply that wisdom so that now you can train the mind, yes, through meditation and all the other tools and techniques and practices that the Buddha shares, but you need wisdom about how to make wise decisions, because you've made certain unwise decisions in the past that have led to unwholesome results. And if you're not cultivating wisdom to lead to improved decision making, you're just going to continue to experience those same unwholesome results coming back to you over and over and over again because of the decisions that you're making. So today we're going to be starting with meditation, but then after our meditation, we're going to move into helping you to understand the 5 precepts. And if you've heard that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, this isn't the actual teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't teach that way. That sounds like a bunch of rules and commandments. It sounds like black and white. This isn't the way that the Buddha taught. So I'm going to share with you the original words of the Buddha on the 5 precepts, and I'm going to then help you to apply it to today so that you can see certain decisions that you're making of how you would apply these decisions. Because the Buddha is helping you to awaken to the wisdom of the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result. But we're going to get started with meditation first. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. Welcome to our class today. We're going to start with breathing mindfulness meditation. If you'd like to take a position, either seated, lying, or standing, these are the 3 that work out really well for online learning. And then the walking position is something you can learn as well. I'm going to ease us into the meditation with chanting. Then there'll be some guidance. Then there'll be a period of time where it'll just be quiet and we're meditating together. Then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And then that's where I'll start the class with helping you understand the 5 precepts. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Hotang Bhagavanang Apivateyami Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa อิติปิโสภะคะวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาดัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมะคะวาพุทธังมะคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารนังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรภูริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you'd like to slowly ease your way out of meditation. All right, once again, I would like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly, and those of you guys that joined us since we started meditating, welcome to everyone. Today's class, we're going to be studying the 5 precepts using the original words of the Buddha to be able to help you understand what it is that the Buddha taught around these important teachings. Without these teachings, you wouldn't have the wisdom to understand how to make these 5 impactful decisions and then be able to produce wholesome results for yourself. You're going to be able to learn through the original words of the Buddha and then be able to independently verify what it is that I'm sharing with you. Remember, none of the teachings of the Buddha are about believing. There's no rites or rituals or ceremonies or worship. There's not any kind of rules or commandments. When I'm teaching you the 5 precepts, it's important to remember that what you're learning and what you're awakening to is the natural law of Kamma. Some people refer to this as karma. That's the Sanskrit version of this word. The original teachings of the Buddha are in the Pali language, so we use the word Kamma. And if this translated to just one English word, I would just use that word because it's much easier for everyone. But because it doesn't just translate to one English word, I still need to use the word Kamma. What this means is it means cause and effect, or action and result. It's the results of your decisions. It's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. That everything that you decide to do, whether it's wise or unwise, is going to produce certain either wholesome results or wholesome kamma, or unwholesome results or unwholesome kamma. And it's all based on the condition of your mind and how you're making the decision. Next week, you're going to learn the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 fires, understanding how all the unwholesome kamma that you're experiencing in life is as a result of these 3 pollutions or these 3 unwholesome roots in the mind. So these Five Precepts, the Buddha is giving you guidance to understand the wisdom of how to make wise decisions that's going to produce wholesome results in your life. And each of these precepts are designed to help you eradicate certain pollutions in your mind. They're not just something that you believe. They're not just something to follow. As I mentioned, they're not rules or commandments. It's just like the natural law of gravity, that the natural law of gravity is affecting us whether we're aware of it or not. And this natural law of Kamma is the same way. And the more that you study and understand the natural law of Kamma, you can see clearly that this is the truth. It's nothing to be believed in. There's no entity or being that's overseeing this. Nobody turns it on or turns it off. It's functioning at all times and affecting you whether you're aware of it or not. So when you're aware and you have wisdom, now you can consciously make decisions that are going to lead to wholesome results. So I'm going to show you what I mean here as we're talking about this first precept and all the others, where you can learn it, examine it, investigate it, you can reflect on it to independently verify it, and you can practice it and see the truth for yourself, awakening to this wisdom, so that now more and more when you're in any particular situation, you'll be comfortable to make any decision that you like. When I'm sharing the teachings of the Five Precepts or any of the other teachings, it's not to convince you to do anything. It's not to guilt, shame, or fear anybody into doing anything. The Buddha didn't teach that way, and neither do I. It's about helping you arise wisdom. It's not about even convincing you to do anything. When you make decisions in your life, it's affecting you, and you need to have the free will choices to make any and all decisions in your life on your own. Where I come in is I'm helping you to understand this natural law of Kamma, and then when you seek guidance to understand any particular decision, I would give you guidance about the natural law of Kamma. I wouldn't tell you whether you should do something or shouldn't do something, but instead just helping you to be able to see this cause and effect or action and result. And you'll be able to see that through investigating the teachings of the Buddha. So here, this first precept, the Buddha says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. Well, when you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, whenever you see that he's teaching something, you need to investigate it and examine it. And one of the things that you can see here is that he's teaching to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So one of the first questions you might ask yourself is, well, how do I determine what a living being is? You need to be able to determine that with clarity and with knowing the truth, and not just assuming what a living being is, but knowing it with 100% certainty. In the teachings of the Buddha, he shares what's called the five aggregates, or the five collections, or the five elements. These are the five things that determine that what a living being is. And I'm going to share them with you here. It's usually something that you learn later in your development, but I'm going to share it with you here and helping you to understand it. And as I do, you can independently reflect on this because you're a living being and you know that you're a living being, so you can reflect and determine if you have all five of these aggregates or all five of these elements. The first one is physical form, that a living being is going to have physical form. And you can see, yes, you have physical form. A living being is going to have feelings in the mind, right? There's certain feelings, and you know you have those feelings. A living being is going to have perceptions. This is your views and opinions about the world, that you look out at the world and you have certain views and certain opinions about the world. And then the fourth element, or the fourth aggregate, is volitional formations. This is choices and decisions, that a living being is going to have free will. They're going to be able to make choices and decisions on their own. Then the fifth aggregate is called the consciousness, or the mind. So these are the five aggregates. The living being is going to have physical form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then a consciousness, or a mind. And you can see you have all five of these things. And you can look at a squirrel, a rabbit, a cat, a dog, a horse, an animal, any of these beings. You can see that they're all living beings because they have all five aggregates. And this is how you can independently verify that, yes, this is actually true. But then you can actually go a step further and you can take something that you know is not a living being, like maybe this electronic device that you're listening to this on, or maybe the chair that you're sitting in. You know that this isn't a living being. So now let's take the five aggregates and compare it and contrast it and see if it either matches this or it doesn't. So ask yourself, does this chair you're sitting in, or does this electronic device you're listening to this on, does it have physical form? Well, the answer is yes, it has physical form, right? Does it have feelings? No, it doesn't have feelings. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? No, it sure doesn't. Does it have volitional formations? Can it on its own make any choices or decisions? This chair can't decide to pick itself up and walk down the street and put itself back down. Same thing with this electronic device. It can't do that. It's only functioning based on human interaction, right? So there's no free will that this computer or this chair has. And then the fifth aggregate is the consciousness or the mind. It doesn't have that either, right? So a living being is going to have all five aggregates, and you can see that this is not a living being. And then you can understand what a living being is and what it isn't. Because anytime you cause harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. Oftentimes in the unenlightened state, we think that when we experience unwholesome results or unwholesome karma, that it's everybody else's fault, that everybody else is to blame for why you're experiencing any particular thing. Or you might think it's good luck, or it's bad luck, or you might think it's destiny or fate. Well, if you resign yourself to thinking that everything you experience is either good luck or bad luck, or it's destiny or fate, or it's somebody else that is causing what you experience, then you're locked in. You can't change anything about your life. But if you understand that you are a living being and that you aren't interested in causing harm to other living beings, and that you can arise wisdom to now make wise decisions that produce wholesome results, now you can take control over your life, and now you can make decisions in cultivating wisdom to improve the results that you experience. So if there's anything in particular that you don't care for about your life, or you prefer not to be occurring, you just need to arise wisdom and make different decisions. And this is part of that wisdom, is to understand what a living being is. Because any time that you're causing harm to a living being, that harm is going to come back to you. So the five aggregates is the best way to think about what a living being is. But while you're learning that, and maybe you haven't quite understood it 100%, it's in volume 2 of the book series. That's where I introduce it to the students. If you would like to do kind of something a little bit shorthand, maybe something a little bit easier for you to remember just to get started, but what the Buddha teaches is the ideal way to think about a living being. But just to help you get started, you might think about a living being as coming from an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness, right? That all three of these things are going to be coming together in order to produce a living being. But that's not 100% the truth. So the teachings of the Buddha, where he teaches the five aggregates, is the way that I would advise you to think about that. But this is kind of like a shorthand way just to get you started. And you can see with the five aggregates, and you can see with this definition too, that plants, bacteria, viruses, things like this, these aren't living beings. But the challenge is that in the unenlightened state, we oftentimes use language and vocabulary that isn't representing true reality. We might say, I'm going to go kill this tree, or I'm going to take this antibiotic and kill the bacteria in my body, right? Or I'm going to kill this virus, right? You're not actually killing the virus or killing the bacteria or killing the tree, because it's not a living being. What we're actually doing is we're harvesting the tree, or we're harvesting the broccoli, or we're eliminating the bacteria, or we're eliminating the virus. So it's important that you speak the truth, like the Buddha taught in the Eightfold Path as right speech. You would like to always represent the truth when you speak. So right now you might default to thinking about killing trees or killing bacteria or killing viruses. But when you understand what a living being is, you will see that you're not actually killing these things, even though you might have been talking about it that way in the past. And then when you understand this precept that it's about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, this has got to start with this being who you are. Whenever you're cultivating loving kindness and compassion, which loving kindness is the genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, having active goodwill, and compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. Whenever you're cultivating this, you need to cultivate it for this being who you are, right? So as you're learning to have compassion for all living beings in the world, you need to have compassion and for those beings, concern for their misfortune, but you need to have concern for your own misfortune too. So this is part of what you're learning and growing and developing, so that you can have loving kindness and compassion for this being by training the mind to become more wise and practicing in such a way that you experience wholesome results. So when you're learning about this compassion and living compassionately for all living beings and not taking the life of living beings, you might ask yourself about certain things that you have maybe been confronted with or that you see in the world. Things like euthanasia of a human or an animal, or termination of a pregnancy, or suicide, or assisted suicide, or capital punishment, or war, or government-sponsored killings, or a murder. These are all intentional killings. But whether it's wise or unwise to do these things or not is going to come down to your decisions. I'm going to help you by talking about a couple of these things and show you how to think about these in terms of this precept, but I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. I'm not making decisions for you. There's no decision tree that says, everybody should make decisions this way. There's not just one permanent right answer for everything. So whenever you're learning something like this from me, and I'm sharing the natural law of Kamma for you, you understand that you always retain the ability to make freedom of choice for your own decisions in your life. I'm just helping you to see the natural law of Kamma. And in some cases, certain thing might be wise, and in some situations, it might be unwise. So let me give you an example of this by walking you through a couple of these. Let's take this one of termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people think of this as a political issue. I don't think of it that way. It's a human issue because it's a medical technology that we've invented, and it's available should it be needed and should somebody decide that they would like to use it. And again, it's always up to each individual to choose for themselves. It's not up to me to choose for a student. In fact, if a student came to me and said, David, should I terminate my pregnancy? I wouldn't say yes or no. I would say, well, if you terminate your pregnancy, this is what you'll experience based on the natural law of Kamma. And if you don't terminate it, this is what you'll experience. And then it's up to the individual to make the decision for themselves. My role as a teacher isn't to make decisions for you, but is to give you wisdom to think about the decisions that you're encountering so that then as you're moving to this higher consciousness, free of pollution of mind, you can make the best decision for you in that situation. So this termination of a pregnancy, or what some people might refer to as an abortion, there are certain situations where it could actually be quite wise for an individual. Let's just say that a woman has a fetus in her womb, and through medical technology, we know that this fetus is never going to live a viable life outside the womb, that it's either already dead or it will die inside the womb, or it will die through childbirth, and it will never have the ability to live a life because it's actually doesn't have the organs that it needs to live life, for example. So if this was the case and the woman's life was in danger, the woman might choose on her own to terminate the pregnancy because that's living compassionately for all living beings. Because if this fetus was in the body and it was going to potentially threaten the woman's life and she's going to die from this, and she didn't terminate the pregnancy, she may be not living compassionately for all living beings, which is the being who you are. So if somebody chose to do this, there's not going to be any unwholesome results because they have made a choice based in wisdom. And now they're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, realizing that this fetus is not going to be viable outside the womb, and it's to help protect the life of the woman. And whether she chooses to do that or not is up to her. It's not up to me, like I mentioned, to make that kind of decision. But then there could be other situations where, let's just say an individual is maybe having different sexual partners, maybe they're having unprotected sex, maybe they're getting pregnant regularly, and maybe they're turning to abortion for birth control. So maybe like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different times they've had an abortion. And instead of taking birth control, they're using abortion for that instead. Well, in this situation, having so many abortions, it can be affecting the health of the woman's body because of repeatedly killing like this, intentional killings, and not for any other reason than birth control, then this will threaten the health of the woman. And this is the unwholesome results that's coming back to them. Then you might look at something like war, where a government can tell citizens of their country to go to that country over there and kill those people. We would like you to kill those people. And when you come back home, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. And if you killed somebody here in our country, we're going to prosecute you for murder. But if you go over there and kill those people, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. So a government might say this to their citizens, and this has been happening all throughout history. And this is a human law, and it's imperfect because human beings are involved in the creation of it and the administering of it. So it's imperfect. But the natural law of Kamma is functioning at all times, and you can't escape what it is that you experience based on your individual decisions. So if somebody chose to go off to war and fight in war, whether they choose to do that or not is their choice, of course, but there's going to be certain results. You're very likely to get killed yourself, right? Because you're killing others. So now the harm is coming back to you that you can likely be killed. At a minimum, you can get injured, right? You could get an amputation. You could get a brain injury. You could get mental health challenges. You could potentially get addicted to substances. You could, oftentimes people come back and commit suicide. You might have difficulties reintegrating into society and securing housing and clothing and food and basic necessities. Oftentimes when people come back from war, they really struggle to reintegrate into society. This is the natural law of Kamma. This is the cause and effect, or the action and result, that because of going off and killing, that now it's very challenging for you in your day-to-day life, because you can't escape the natural law of Kamma. A government could tell you, we're not going to prosecute you for murder, but that's just the humans telling you that. That's not the natural law of Kamma of cause and effect. If you're causing harm to others, harm is going to come to you. And that's what's occurring through war. So you would need to look at these kinds of situations and others and decide for yourself what you're going to do in any given situation. The teachings of the Buddha, it's not a decision tree that he tells you what you should do in any given situation. And like I mentioned, it's not rules and commandments. There's not just one right answer in every situation. You need to move to this higher consciousness where you're thinking through your decisions and deciding whether it would be wise or unwise for you to make any particular decision. And the natural law of Kamma is the most unbiased teacher you will ever find. It's going to show you whether you've made wise decisions or unwise decisions. Because if you make wise decisions, you're going to experience wholesome results. There's nothing unwholesome that's going to come back to you. But if you're making unwise decisions, you're going to experience unwholesome results coming back to you. Even the slightest little unwiseness, if there's just 1% of your decision that is unwise, you're going to see that Kamma coming back to you, right? So you're going to need to pay attention to the various decisions that you have in a given day, and then you're going to need to apply the various teachings. And where you have struggles with that, or you're not quite sure, you can reach out to me and I'll help you. Either before a decision, I will guide you in different options and you make the decision for yourself, or after a decision, if you're experiencing certain results, you can also come and and I will help you to understand why you're experiencing what it is that you're experiencing. Then as students talk to me over the years, some of them has asked me different questions about these things that I'm going to just kind of point out and kind of talk about, but we can go into all the details about every one of these precepts. I'm going to open up to questions that you guys might have about anything that you're encountering in life or you have encountered in life. But here's a couple of things that people have asked me about. Some people ask me about a DNR, or a do not resuscitate. This is a legal document that you can sign and put in place while you're alive that says, if you die, if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. And people ask me, is this living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? And the answer is yes. You haven't done any intentional killing here. What you've done is you've said, hey, I'm comfortable with death. If you experience death, if this body experiences death, don't bring me back to life using medical technology. So if somebody was interested in doing that, you're still practicing this precept. It's not something you have to do or you're required to do, but sometimes students ask me about that because they have done one of these or they're considering doing one of these, and this is something that you can understand, that you haven't actually killed a living being. What's happened is a living being has died, and you're saying, I'm comfortable with that death, that don't use medical technology to bring me back. Then you might be thinking about defense or protection, right? Like what if you're at home 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, and somebody breaks into your house and comes in through the window? I can assure you they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. That's not why they're there, right? They haven't broken into your window to bring you chocolate and flowers at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. They're there to do harm. So what I advise students to do in this situation is, if possible, just get out of the house, right? Get out. Because if they would like to steal something, if they would like to break something, okay, do whatever you would like to do, but keep this being safe, right? If you can get out of the house, go get out of the house. Then call the police because they have the tools and the training and all the equipment that they need in order to come and deal with this situation. But you don't necessarily have that. But see, this is where it's not a black and white decision, because you're not always going to be able to get out of the house, right? Because this person might be breaking in. Maybe you look outside and there's a fire outside and you can't get outside. Or maybe there's a gang of people outside your house and you can't get outside the house, right? So the first option I would say is get out, but you might be backed up against a corner and now this person's coming at you. And it would not be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings if you just stood there and let this person hit you and beat you up and maybe even kill you or murder you, right? So if you need to defend this body and you need to cause harm in order to accomplish that, that's the harm that that individual is experiencing based on their unwise decision. They've made the unwise decision to break into someone's home and start attacking another living being. And when they are, that's an unwise decision. They're causing harm, and now this harm is coming to them. But what I suggest you do in that situation is use the least amount of harm as possible in order to stop the situation. So if they've got like a stick, find a baseball bat, right? And if they've got a baseball bat, find like a 2x4 or something like that, right? Use something to stop this situation from happening, but use the least amount of force as is needed in order to stop it. But if you needed to kill this individual in order to stop it, you're not going to experience any unwholesome kamma in that situation because you didn't intend to go out and actively look for someone based in craving and hatred and anger to try to find somebody to kill them. You're just protecting yourself. So you're not going to experience unwholesome results coming back to you. But by causing the least amount of harm as possible, this will ensure that you don't experience any kind of unwholesome results coming back to you. Like if they have a wrench and maybe you killed them, you might find that that causes problems for you. Whereas if you can maneuver this wrench out of their hand and you can just hold them down until the police get there, that would be much better if you can, right? So you're going to need to stay calm and you're going to need to process the situation around you and make wise decisions. And then sometimes students ask me about consuming animal products and going to a vegan lifestyle. If this is something you would like to do, you can do that, of course. You're going to find that it produces wholesome results for you because when you eat meat, you're ingesting the flesh of an animal, but you're not only ingesting the flesh of an animal, there's drugs and hormones and toxins in there too that's affecting the health of the body. There's been various research done on meats and how they affect the human body, and it's very clear that this is causing unwholesome kamma for the body and for our environment. They've taken wild fish out of very clean streams in America, for example, and this stream is supposed to be utterly clean and clear water, and they've tested the flesh and they found over 80 or 90 different substances. And some of the substances they found are things like cocaine, antidepressants, and things like this because human beings have been flushing those things down the toilet. It's polluted the water table, and now even clean running streams have these chemicals in the stream, so now it's ending up in the flesh of the fish, for example. And when you ingest that fish, it's affecting the condition of the body and the condition of the mind. They've even done research like after World War II in Germany, when German people didn't have much money, they went to a plant-based food supply because they couldn't afford meat. So they noticed that the health of the German people significantly improved and disease and illness went down. And then after so many years, when they regained their finances and they started purchasing meat again, health and sickness went up. And the same thing is true in China. For so long, they've been plant-based eaters largely, and their illness and sickness was pretty low. And then recently they've started to eat more and more meat, and now the sickness is going up in their population. So you can see this in scientific studies, but remember, you're not interested in believing anything. You don't believe me, you don't believe the scientific studies. If you would like to see the truth for yourself, you can choose to move to a plant-based food supply, and you'll be able to see that the body becomes healthier and the mind becomes healthier because you don't have those chemicals of cocaine and antidepressants circulating around. You don't have the hormones from farmed animals because farmers nowadays are putting a lot of antibiotics and hormones into their animals in order to get them to grow faster so they can make more profit. and then you're ingesting that and it's affecting the health of the body. So if you purge these things out of your food supply, what you'll notice is that the health of the body and the mind improve. And if you were ever going to decide to do this, I would suggest you do it gradually, where you gradually move away, allowing the body and the mind to adjust. So you might move to like eggs and cheese for a period of time. Whereas if you just snap your fingers and do it cold turkey, it's oftentimes not a sustainable decision. Whereas if like maybe one day you're eating plant-based food, one day not, one day plant-based food, one day not, or one meal plant-based, one meal not, because you're going to need to find new restaurants, new suppliers for food, new recipes. This is the fun part. There's a lot of fun on the path to enlightenment. You get to learn new things like cooking new food, which is plant-based, or meeting new people in plant-based restaurants and things like this. So I'm not telling you you have to do this. I'm not telling you you're required to do it, but if you do it, you'll notice the wholesome results. Because of the wise decision, there's these wholesome results, or wholesome Kamma, that you won't experience the digestion issues, you won't experience the lack of clarity in the mind and other sicknesses that are being experienced in the body based on ingesting meat. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is move to the next precept, which is the second precept. The Buddha here, his words are, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So obviously what he's talking about here is don't steal from other people. And the reason why is because it causes harm to others. So you can't cause somebody discontentedness. You can't cause them to be angry or frustrated or irritated or annoyed. You learned that in the Four Noble Truths earlier in the program. But you can cause harm. There's a difference between discontentedness and harm. Discontentedness are those conditioned feelings that arise based on some condition. They're pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. Based on some craving, desire, attachment, the mind in the unenlightened state is going to arise some conditional feeling. But what harm is where you're injuring somebody's material possessions, you're injuring their reputation, or you're injuring them physically, right? So you can cause harm to others, but you can't cause them discontentedness. So if I stole somebody's car, for example, I've caused them harm because now they can't travel to work and earn an income, or they can't take their kids to school, or they can't go to the store and pick up groceries in order to live their life and sustain their life through the food and supplies that they need to sustain their life. So I've caused this person harm by stealing their material possessions. And now having done so, this harm is going to come back to me. But if they got angry because I stole their car, their mind is having a craving. They're craving permanence, right? So one of the things that the Buddha is teaching you is to not cause harm to other beings, because any harm that you cause is going to come back to you. But he's also teaching you how to navigate a world where people are attached to things and they're holding on to things, because as you get closer and closer to enlightenment, you're going to see so much discontentedness in the world around you. You might already be seeing that. So many people are discontent, and so many people are blaming their discontentedness on other people. So if you stole something from somebody, you're causing harm to that person that they can't now use that thing, but they're also going to get discontent. And you haven't caused it, but they're getting discontent. And now they're going to attribute that to you, and they're going to want to take out their anger on somebody, right? So you could get in a lot of trouble through being in fights, or your body could be injured. You could get murdered for stealing. You can go to jail. There's all kinds of unwholesome results that are occurring as a result of that. It's important to also not assume that something can be taken or used. This is part of this precept. Like, say, for example, I was in a college class and I had a paper that I was handing in and it needed to be graded by the professor. And maybe the professor's out of the class. And I see a stapler on their desk and I pick up their stapler and I'm stapling my paper in order to turn it in. Well, if I've assumed that this stapler can be used, I've just made an unwise decision, because now when the professor comes in and they see me using the stapler, they can get angry. They can get frustrated because they're attached to the stapler, right? They're craving that permanence. Like, hey, what are you doing using my stapler, right? And now their anger, because of their lack of wisdom, they're going to falsely attribute that to me, right? And now they're going to probably give me a bad grade on that paper. Or they might fail me in the entire class. Maybe I've worked for 3 months or 4 months in this class and now I get a failing grade because this professor is angry, maybe taking their anger out on me, right? So the Buddha is teaching you how to navigate this world of unenlightened beings so that you don't find yourself in conflict by doing something like assuming something can be used or taken. It would be wiser to ask for permission. And if the professor says, no, you can't use my stapler, okay, then go find one somewhere else, right? Go to another classroom and ask another teacher, or go to the store and get one, or use something else, use a paper clip or something like this. Also notice that the Buddha says here, accepting what is given. What he's teaching you here is that when somebody's practicing generosity with you, it's wise to accept that generosity. Because when someone's practicing generosity, it's enhancing the quality of their mind. And if you were to not accept that gift, it's like shutting down their ability to enhance the quality of their mind and get closer and closer to enlightenment through eliminating craving, desire, attachment. So if you shut down and shut down and shut down people's generosity, eventually people are going to stop practicing generosity with you. They're not going to be interested in giving things to you. So if somebody gives you something, even if you're not going to use it, it's wise to accept it. And then you can practice generosity and give it to somebody else. So say grandma is giving you this certain sweater that you know you're never going to wear this sweater ever. Accept the generosity, right? Grandma's giving you this wonderful sweater that she thinks is so great, but you know you're never going to wear it. So rather than putting it in your closet and letting it wilt away for 20 or 30 years and going to waste and those resources are wasted, instead give it to somebody else, right? If grandma gets angry because you gave it to somebody else, that's because grandma wasn't practicing pure generosity. She had a craving, she had an expectation, she had a want, and she's causing that anger herself, not you, right? So maybe you practice generosity, maybe it goes through 6, 8, 10 different hands before it finally finds that person that thinks it's the most beautiful sweater they've ever seen, and they're going to wear it every day of their life because they enjoy it so much, right? So this along the way has produced all this benefit of all these 8, 10 people have practiced generosity, and everybody's enhancing the quality of their mind, training their mind to let go. But remember, these teachings aren't black and white. You need to have this higher consciousness to think through what you're doing. Because if somebody offered you cocaine or crystal meth or heroin, you're not going to accept what is given. So this is where you can see that the teachings of the Buddha, they're not rules or commandments. It's not black and white. You've got to be able to decide for yourself what is wise in any one given situation. He's giving you guidance to understand this natural law of Kamma, and then you need to penetrate it with wisdom and be able to see very clearly what is it that he's teaching you. He's teaching you that it's wise to accept people's generosity, but you're going to see in a moment that it's unwise to have drugs and alcohol and substances, because this is going to pollute your mind, and you know you can get arrested for those kinds of things, right? So accepting what is given is helpful so that people will feel comfortable practicing generosity with you, and it helps to enhance the quality of their mind. And if you need to share that with somebody else and give it to someone else, so be it. There's some cultures that call this regifting, and they think that it's a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just giving it to somebody else because you're not going to use it, and let it find a home of somebody that can actually use it. Then notice that the Buddha says awaiting what is given here in this precept. What he's talking about here is about not putting your expectations on other people to get you something. Like, let's say you have a life partner and they're going away on a business trip, and you're like, oh, honey, get me this and get me this and get me that and get me that. You're kind of loading them up and burdening them with all kinds of things that they need to now get you. And if they are in their business trip and they're kind of running around trying to find these things for you, right? This is going to put strain in your relationship. And now maybe when they come back, they don't have everything you asked them for, or they didn't get exactly what it is you wanted. And now you're frustrated and you're angry because you had an expectation that they would get you a particular thing. So the Buddha instead teaches you to await what is given, that don't put your expectations on people. But there are some situations where someone's going on a trip. This happens to me with students sometimes here in Chiang Mai. They're going on a trip and they're coming back to Chiang Mai, and they're saying, hey, David, can I pick you up something while I'm in the USA? Or, hey, I'm going over to this country. Would you like me to pick you up something? right? And they're offering. This is their generosity of saying, hey, would you like me to pick you up something? So in this situation, they've opened the door, right? And you still would like to share something without expectation, right? Like if you expect them to get this for you and they don't bring it back, you'll be angry and you'll be frustrated. So you would like to await what is given. And this is a helpful precept for you to understand as it relates to stealing, to assuming that you could take something or use it, accepting what people give you, and awaiting what it is that people give you. Don't put expectations on others to give you any particular thing, like on your birthday or on Mother's Day or Father's Day or something like this. Don't have the expectation that someone's going to give you something. So let me know if you guys have questions here on this one. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next precept, which is the third one. I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to walk you through piece by piece and helping you to understand what the Buddha is teaching you. Here, the third precept, he says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men, who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. Okay, so there's a lot of details here. So notice where the Buddha is talking about not having sex with someone who's protected by their relatives, right? Their mother, father, and all these other people. What he's talking about here is minors. That if you were to have sex with an 8-year-old or 12-year-old child, this is causing harm because that individual is learning and growing in their family unit and they need to learn and their mind needs to grow and develop. And having sexual relations with an individual who's a minor, this is very impactful and very difficult for them to deal with at that age. And if you were to have sex with this individual, it would be very impactful for them. If you have had sex and you can think back to the very first time you had sex, no matter what age it was very impactful. So the Buddha teaches not to have sex with minors. And here he's explaining to you that because they're growing and they're developing and their family needs to teach them. And this would be so impactful to their mind that it could cause a lot of difficulties. And in most places in the world, the human law matches the natural law of Kamma here, right? That most places it's illegal to have sex with minors. But there are a few places in the world that it's legal to have sex with minors. But if you look at those places are really struggling. Their economy is struggling, their political system is struggling, society is really struggling because people are growing up and they're having sex when they're 6, 8, 10, 12 years old. And it's really struggle for those people in that environment. So this is the natural law of Kamma of cause and effect because they don't understand this wisdom and they're choosing to have sex at that young age, and it's people that are freely doing this, it's causing difficulties in their society. Notice where the Buddha says, whose violation entails a penalty. What he's talking about here is sex without consent. That if you were to rape somebody and forcibly have sex with them, this is a violation that entails a penalty. This is harm that you're causing because you're forcibly having sex with somebody. And that harm is going to come back to you. You can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can of course go to jail, all kinds of different problems that can happen because of that. Notice where the Buddha says, abandon unchastity. What chastity is chastity would be like having sex with nobody, like you're not having sex with anybody. If you know about what a chastity belt is, back in medieval times, there was something called a chastity belt that fathers would put metal underwear on their daughters that have a lock and key. I can't imagine what it would be like walking around with metal underwear, but this is what they did during medieval times. And it was only the father that could unlock this. And then the daughter was able to now have sexual relations with somebody, right? So that would be chastity, right? There's no sex with anybody. What unchastity would be to have sex with lots and lots and lots and lots of people. If you're doing this, you can see the cause and effect and the action and result. Or if you've ever done this, you can see this for yourself, that you're very likely to get sexually transmitted diseases. This is the unwholesome Kamma coming back to us. You can also know that when you're having sex with multiple people, you might be ending up having to lie in order to accomplish this, and you're having all kinds of difficulties because of that. But in some situations, there's individuals who might live in a culture like here in Thailand where you meet a certain person and you go off and you form a relationship, and now you come home to your relatives and you ask them like, hey, can we move in and actually live here for a period of time, save our money, and then we're going to go buy our own place. And in this situation, it's not what the Buddha is talking about here, about protected by their mother, father, and relatives. Instead, the family has accepted the relationship. So in this situation, they've accepted that you guys are having sexual relation. So this is actually practicing this particular precept. You've gotten the approval of this person to move into the home with you. Then, where the Buddha says, who are protected by teachings, what he's referring to here is somebody who's decided to be celibate. Because in your journey to enlightenment, you can get up to the second stage of enlightenment and your life's going to be quite peaceful in that second stage of enlightenment. But you're not yet enlightened. The mind is not yet experiencing enlightenment. Instead, you're still going to experience a bit of agitation and annoyance here and there. Even though you do all the other work on the path to enlightenment, when you want sex and you can't get it, you're going to get frustrated and agitated or annoyed. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you will have decided to let go of sexual activity. That might not be now. It might not be 5 years from now. It might not be 10 years from now. It might be long in the future. But you can do all this work to get to that second stage of enlightenment and live a very peaceful life. But then at some point, you're going to say, okay, been there, done that. I've had enough of that. Your partner's had enough of that. And you guys decide to let it go. And now you can make your way all the way to enlightenment because you won't get agitated when you can't have sex because you don't have a desire for it any longer. You've eliminated that craving. So if there's somebody who's decided to be celibate because they're making their way to enlightenment, one of the best things that could ever happen in a community is for an individual to get to enlightenment. So if you tried to lure somebody away from their celibacy, it's causing harm to that individual because they're not able to get to enlightenment. And then it's also causing harm to the community because having an individual with deep wisdom about how to get to enlightenment in the community is really wonderful for that community. And of course, if that individual chose to step away and not have celibacy anymore and actually have sex, that's their choice. But what the Buddha is teaching you to do is to not try to lure this person away. And here in Thailand, they make this easy for you because ordained practitioners wear robes and shave their hair and they're not having sex. And typically people in Thailand that are wearing white on a continuous basis, they're not having sex either. So I wear white every day, but I don't wear it because I'm trying to broadcast to people that I don't have sex. No matter what somebody did, I wouldn't be interested in having sex at this point in my life. So that's not why I wear white, but here in Thailand, people do that. So you'll find Buddhist communities that are set up that way to make sure that others know that, okay, these folks are not having sex. So that way, if you're interested in having sex, you know that you can talk with people who are dressing in a particular way. So if you were to lure somebody away from their celibacy, it's causing harm to the community and it's causing harm to that person. And the Buddha is advising you and teaching you not to do that based on the natural law of Kamma, because in a community of people, you would like more and more and more people to get to enlightenment because this is going to help lots and lots of people. And then here, sex with people who are already committed in relationships or sex outside of any relationship you're committed to. This is where the Buddha is saying who have a husband, wife, or partner. And then he says, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. If you were to go outside of your relationship to have sex, this is where you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get in arguments and fights, you can lose your wealth, all kinds of things. Or say that you were single and you had sex with somebody else who is in a relationship already, right? Now, in that situation, you can still get beat up and murdered and all kinds of difficulties. You can lose your reputation in the community as people find out what you're doing. So this can be very problematic for you. So you'd like to be sure that any sexual partners, that you just have one partner and that your partner only has one partner, being you, right? Because this is going to make sure you don't get sexually transmitted diseases. There's no arguments and fights and people getting beat up and murdered over tugging and pulling with sexual partners. And then you might think about human trafficking, that if you go into an environment where people are being human trafficked, meaning they're being forced to have sex, and now you're paying for that, this is causing harm. And you can potentially, again, experience getting beat up, getting murdered, you can get robbed, you can get sexually transmitted diseases because people are having sex with multiple people. And this is unadvisable and unwise. Then there's other things that you could think about too in relationship to this precept, is like paid sexual services, kind of like what I was just talking about. If you ever go into those kinds of environments, again, you can get beat up, you can get robbed, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can have all kinds of difficulties there. Notice that the Buddha doesn't teach anything about same-sex partners here in this precept that is typically translated as no sexual misconduct. But this is the actual words of the Buddha here. He doesn't mention same-gender relationships because there's no harm that's being caused here. What he's teaching you in this precept is how to not cause harm through your sexual contact. So if a male and a female are choosing to have sex with each other, they're loyal, loving, consenting adults. They're not causing harm to anybody. So if there's two other loyal, loving, consenting adults that happen to be male and two others that just happen to be females, they're not causing harm to anybody either. The Buddha understood this 2,500 years ago, that there is no harm in same-gender relationships. He knew about same-gender relationships because he talks about it in his teachings. And if you understand the universal truth of impermanence, which I've taught you before, then you understand that it's not possible for every man to be interested in having sex with a woman, or for every woman to be interested in having sex with a man. If every man and every woman was interested in having sex with the opposite gender, that would be permanence, and that doesn't exist. There's never been a time in human history where every male has had sex with females or every female has had sex with males. It just doesn't exist. And the Buddha was aware of this during his lifetime. But he understood that a loyal, loving, consenting couple, that they're not causing harm to anyone. And he understood this 2,500 years ago. There's people today that don't understand this. And there's people who get angry and really upset when they see a same-gender couple or when it's talked about or discussed. And that's because of their craving. They're craving and longing, yearning for every person to have sex with someone of the opposite gender. And then when they don't get their craving fulfilled, this anger is arising. And where this is coming from is the lack of wisdom or the unknowing of true reality. So if you prefer same-gender relationships, or you know people that do, this is completely normal. It's not anything strange or weird. You haven't done anything wrong. This is completely normal, and you can understand it through the universal truth of impermanence and the teachings of the Buddha. So while other people might get angry knowing that someone has a same-gender relationship, they're causing their anger themselves. You, if you're a person who prefers same-gender relationships, you're not causing their anger. And then we can also understand transgender individuals through the teachings of the Buddha. That once again, if you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely separate, and these two things are coming together to create a human being, that it's understandable that the sexual organs of the body can be of one gender and the mind can be of a different gender. If every single body was identifying with the mind as being that same gender, that would be permanence. But we don't have the universal truth of permanence. We have the universal truth of impermanence. We can see that to be the case, that there's going to be some people who have sexual organs of a male who identify with a female in the mind. And there's going to be some people who have sexual organs of a male who identify as a male. This is completely normal with the universal truth of impermanence. And the same thing goes for the female gender too, that there's going to be sexual organs that's a female, but the mind identifies with a male. So the universal truth of impermanence helps us to understand this, and understanding that it's completely normal. But also the cycle of rebirth helps us to understand this too, right? Remember, the Buddha is not teaching you the way the world should be. He's teaching you the way the world is. And the way the world is that there's this universal truth of impermanence where it can't be possible for everybody that has a certain gender of sexual organs for their mind to identify in exactly the same way. That would be permanence. But also this cycle of rebirth, if you understand this, that this isn't your first existence, that we've all been countless existences in the past. So say that there's a mind that identifies as a male that has ended up in a female body in the human existence with female sexual organs. Well, maybe that mind was of many different genders in the past, and maybe it was male, 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 and now it comes into this life and it happens to be in a body with female sexual organs. So the mind can identify with being male while the body is a female gender. And the same thing can be true for the other side too, that you could have a male body with a mind that identifies as a female. It's completely normal if you understand the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth. And once again, there's people who get angry and irritated because they want everybody to identify in exactly the same way as their body. But this is the unknowing of true reality. This is the craving. This is the lack of wisdom of the natural laws of existence that the Buddha is teaching you. He's explaining to you the world around you so that you can understand it. Sometimes students ask me about masturbation because with masturbation, some people have been taught that it's all immoral and that you should never masturbate and these kinds of things. Well, the first thing to ask yourself is, who are you causing harm to? Is there another being that you're causing harm to? Well, the answer is no, because there's no other being involved, right? Potentially, you're just masturbating by yourself. So it's not that masturbation is all wise or all unwise. It's about how you're using it and to understand how you're using it. If you're using masturbation to decrease your sexual desire and decrease your sensual desire, this is actually beneficial. But if it's increasing, this is harmful to your own mind. So for example, say somebody has 5 boyfriends and girlfriends or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends, and they've been listening to me talk here, and they're like, I should only have one. That's really wise for me to just have one. And now maybe they decide to shed some of their relationships and just come down to one partner. But maybe they have this high sexual drive because maybe they've been having sex with lots of people. And maybe they need to use a bit of masturbation to decrease their sexual desire so that now they can be loyal to just one partner. And in this situation, this was actually helpful. This was a wise decision. Or say somebody was having the thought to go outside and rape somebody, and now they use a bit of masturbation in order to eliminate that craving. And now they choose not to rape somebody, but instead to masturbate. And in this situation, it's produced wholesome results. So it was a wise decision. But also remember, it's not black and white, that there can be a situation where maybe you're masturbating so frequently, maybe 10, 15, 20 times a day, and you're maybe injuring the body, right, through doing this, or causing harm to your mind through the arising of more and more sensual desire and sexual contact that the mind's craving. So you need to look at whether you're decreasing your sensual desire or you're increasing it through your masturbation. It's not all wise and it's not all unwise. Now, sex with animals, this is one of the few things that it's black and white, right? Like an animal cannot give you consent in order to have sex with it. And I imagine if somebody tried to do that, they would get injured, they could get diseases and illnesses and things like this. So it's really unwise to do that. And then you might decide to look at any kind of pornography addiction that you might have if you're watching pornography. That if you're watching pornography, oftentimes this takes your mind into a fantasy world that's really hard to come out of. That even when you come out of pornography addiction, it's very challenging to be able to have relationships with actual living beings and feel that it's fulfilling. It might feel unsatisfying by the time you do that. So if you're interested in sexual contact, I suggest and encourage you to go towards an actual living being who's interested in having sexual contact with you and doing it in the way that the Buddha is describing here. So you can gradually move away from any pornography addiction, and you'll notice that your mind will become more clear, more focused, and you'll have a better stability of your mind. So this is the third precept and some of the things that you can apply it to in today's society. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Of course, in the book, there's a lot more details here. I go through and describe each one of these things. So if you're not reading the book yet, it would be wise to do so. So let me know if you guys have questions here. All right. I see a question here from Julia. Thank you, Teacher David. I find myself lost in thought when meditating, or if I'm hungry, my mind goes there and it's difficult to bring it back to the breath. Maybe I just need to practice more. Also, in regards to meat eating, in Southeast culture, I think you mean Southeast Asian culture, at the monastery, the monks just eat whatever the worshippers bring, which happening to be meat dishes most of the time. Should they be vegetarian? Sometimes meat provides essential proteins, like for children. Maybe they need to just get protein supplements. Thank you. Okay, so the meditation question, yes, you're going to find it difficult to bring your mind back to the breath. You're saying when the body's hungry, right? So it's wise to go ahead and have a little bit of food then before you eat, right? Or if you're struggling with the mind wandering like that, you can also put the mind in the situation and try to gain its composure and stability if you like. It depends on how much you like to challenge your mind. But based on what I know about your practice, Julia, I don't necessarily suggest you challenge your mind right now. I think that it's already challenged enough with some of the day-to-day things that you're experiencing. But in the future, you might decide to put the mind in that situation to challenge it a bit. But for now, just develop your meditation with having had a little bit of food. And then in terms of eating meat, this is one of the biggest misunderstandings in some Buddhist countries, like here in Thailand. There's a big misunderstanding that people think that if they don't kill the animal, that they're not experiencing the unwholesome Kamma. But this is like, I didn't steal the car, I'm just driving the car. Right? But you're still going to get arrested. You're still going to have problems. If the owner sees you driving their car, they're going to be very angry and they're going to want to beat you up, maybe murder you, get you arrested or something else, right? So you can't eat meat and not be affected by it because, as I mentioned, there's the drugs and hormones and toxins in the meat. So that's why here in Thailand, they eat a lot of meat, but they also suffer a lot of stomach cancer here in Thailand. It's very high on the list of killers here in Thailand. So if you're going to make an offering to a teacher or a Dain practitioner of food, I would suggest that you offer non-meat products. And there are some places here in Thailand, some temples that know this teaching, and the community knows that too. So they will only offer plant-based food to the ordained practitioners or to teachers. So like students who offer me food, they will tend to only offer plant-based food like fruits and vegetables and things like this. So that can get out and the people around the temple can learn that. But there's a lot of places here in Southeast Asia that don't understand that, and they do still eat meat. And unfortunately, this is impacting the health of the ordained practitioners. This is a big problem here in Asia right now, is that, yeah, the monks are just eating whatever is given to them. And oftentimes it's unhealthy food that's being given to them. And because of that, their bodies are very unhealthy. And there's some people who are unordaining because of that. Or it's putting a big strain on their medical necessities and their ability to acquire medical care because they're not ingesting healthy food. So if you're going to make an offering, it would be wise to offer healthy food and plant-based food. Okay, so it looks like that's all of our questions for up to here. So now I'm going to move on to the fourth precept. Here's the words of the Buddha: abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Here what the Buddha is talking about is ensuring that you're not lying. Because if you lie, the Buddha is giving you the reason why that he's teaching you this, right? That you can be trustworthy, you can be dependable, one to be relied on, a true speaker. Whereas if you in your personal professional relationships were lying, people's going to discover those lies. And now when they discover those lies, it's going to cause problems in your life because people aren't going to look at you as trustworthy, dependable, somebody to be relied on, right? So you're going to have difficulties in your relationships. And if you've ever done a lot of lying, then you know that you had to obsessively figure out with your mind, what did you say to one person versus what did you say to the other person? And now your mind's having to constantly figure that out. And how would you ever be able to get to a peaceful and joyful mental state if you're obsessively figuring out and trying to figure out what you said from one person to the next? So these kind of teachings are helping you to maintain healthy relationships, but it's also helping you to eliminate the pollutions of the mind. So when somebody lies, there's an underlying craving there. There's something that they want. And if they tell the truth, they're not going to get it. But if they lie, they feel like they're going to get what they want, what they expect, what they crave, what they're longing and yearning for. So by you choosing to speak the truth, now you can speak in a way that isn't based in craving, and you can be reliable and trustworthy. And you're going to need to practice in ways where you're speaking the truth. And speaking the truth doesn't always mean that you tell people everything that you know, right? Sometimes what students ask me questions about is like, say that there was somebody being chased by some murderer and they ran into your house, and the person is hiding in your house, and the murderer shows up to your house and says, did such and such come here, right? Telling the truth doesn't mean that you tell people everything you know, right? You can still speak the truth in this situation. You can say, Rebecca, you're looking for Rebecca? Have you seen her anywhere? And they're like, no, did she come into your house? Well, I don't know that somebody would come into my house because it's kind of dark here. Did you see her come into my house? You can kind of redirect their mind to somewhere else. Maybe she's run around somewhere. Maybe we should go look in the yard. Maybe she's out in the yard somewhere, right? And maybe you redirect them to another place, right? So you don't have to tell people everything you know in this kind of situation, right? But if you were in a court of law, for example, and you didn't tell everything that you knew, you could potentially run into problems. So this is where you need to have discernment. You need to have wise decision making to decide, would it be wise for me to tell everything I know here or not, right? So speaking the truth is so important. And the Buddha understood this so deeply that I included this other teaching here to be able to help you to see how closely he actually practiced this teaching. Here he's actually teaching his son, Rahula. Sometimes people think that he left his family and he never came back, but this is actually untrue. After he got to enlightenment, he actually spent time in the area where his family was. And his wife, his mother, which was his stepmother, his son, other members of his family started to learn with him and ordain with him. So here he's actually teaching his son. And he's explaining to his son that he shouldn't tell a deliberate lie, even as a joke, right? If you can imagine an individual who's a Buddha, who is so wise and explaining all the truth to their students, that if in their classes they were speaking the truth, but on the side over here they were lying when they're telling jokes, the students wouldn't know whether they're speaking the truth or not when they're teaching their classes, right? So the Buddha understood he needed to speak the truth so well that even when he told a joke, he didn't tell a lie. Because this way people could see him as being trustworthy, dependable, a true speaker, one to be relied on. So perhaps you might need to look at that as well, that it actually takes a lot more work to create a joke that is the truth. It takes a lot more wisdom to be able to do that. But oftentimes when you do that, it's actually funnier, right? To tell a joke that's the truth, it makes people laugh actually a lot more because there's a lot more work that went into creating that joke. Another thing that you can glean from this teaching is that a Buddha tells jokes, right? An enlightened being has fun, right? Sometimes people get this image of a Buddha sitting on the cloud somewhere and constantly meditating and being so serious and solemn all the time. This isn't true, right? An enlightened being is going to have fun. They're going to joke. They're going to laugh. So a Buddha is a human being just like you. They tell jokes, right? So an enlightened being is going to tell jokes. A Buddha is going to tell jokes. But when they do it speaking the truth, right? So you might decide to look at your practice and decide whether you would like to implement some of that or not. So let me know if you guys have questions on this precept. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move to the last precept. Here, the words of the Buddha is refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So remember, whenever you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, you need to investigate them and examine them. And when you come across a teaching like this, if you don't know what the word heedless means or heedlessness, it's important to investigate it, right? What heedlessness means is careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you need to promote awareness of your mind. That's the right mindfulness. You need to have awareness to be able to purify your mind. How would you be able to eliminate the unwholesome qualities and cultivate wholesome qualities in your mind if you didn't have the clarity and the concentration and the attentiveness in the mind? So if you're putting a substance into the body, it's going to produce this heedlessness, then it's taking you in the opposite direction of enlightenment. So you would like to only put substances into the body that's going to nourish and help the body to maintain its health. So here the Buddha is speaking in a way that is timeless, that can be applied throughout all time, during his lifetime, now, and long into the future, because he couldn't have imagined all the different substances that we would have created over time. So that's why he's speaking in this timeless way, because he understood impermanence and that things were going to be constantly changing. So if you understand heedlessness, then you can apply it to all the different substances that there are in the world. And remember, it's not black and white, that you're going to need to look at certain substances and be able to see the truth for yourself. So let's take one like marijuana. I don't have an exhaustive list here. I'm just helping you to see a couple of these substances so that you can then apply it in your day-to-day life. We know that marijuana has medical benefits. It's unrefutable that there's children who have had 20 seizures a day, right? They're like some medical illness where they have 20 seizures, and they give them a little bit of CBD oil, which is the healing properties of the plant. They put it on their tongue and they don't have another seizure for like 6 months, right? So this plant does have medical benefit. So if you're looking to ingest this plant for medical benefits, you will typically look for a very high CBD, and you're usually ingesting it through an oil or an edible or something like that. But typically when people are looking for a high, they're going to look for a high THC content in the plant, and they're typically smoking it, right? And this is going to produce the high. Well, if you're interested in purifying your mind, you're going to only use this plant if you have a real valid medical purpose. And stress and anxiety or difficulty sleeping, that's not a medical purpose to be able to use marijuana, because those things aren't going to be solved by marijuana. They're just going to cover it up. What's causing the stress and anxiety is your craving, desire, attachments. What's causing the difficulties to sleep is the craving, desire, attachment, the pollution in your mind. So marijuana isn't going to solve that. But there are some situations where marijuana can be quite helpful. Then we know that cigarettes don't provide any medical benefit, and more people have learned this over the years. When people were smoking, this is where we saw a lot of lung cancer in the world, right? And even secondhand smoke can affect you in this way as well. So more and more people have figured this out, and that's why less and less people are smoking now. So if you're smoking, I would encourage you to gradually move away from that, because you're going to see the improvement to the condition of the body and the condition of your mind having done so. Then you're going to need to pay attention to prescription medications, because there's some prescription medicines that can be addictive. There's some, of course, that are very helpful. The vast majority of them are. But there's some that can be addictive. So whenever a doctor's prescribing you a medication, you're not interested in just blindly taking that medication. It would be wise to research that medication to be able to see if it's addictive or not. And if it's addictive, then maybe what you do is you ask your doctor for a different prescription. There might be an alternative that isn't addictive. But in some situations, it might be the only one that's available. And now what you might decide to do is take that medication for as short a period as possible and hurry up and get off of it as quick as possible, so that the mind doesn't have an opportunity to get attached to it, or in the body as well. And then caffeine, you're going to need to pay attention to that, because this is a substance that causes heedlessness. It's a stimulant, right? If you allow the body to ingest the caffeine, it's going to take you up with your mind into this elevated state, but then you're going to drop off. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will have sustainable energy all throughout your day. An enlightened being doesn't get exhausted. They don't get tired. They get sleepy where they need to sleep, but they don't get exhausted or tired. But if you rely on caffeine to lift you up and then you crash off of that, you're not allowing the mind to develop its natural sustainable energy. So if you decrease and then ultimately eliminate your caffeine, what you're going to notice is you have sustainable energy. It's going to be hard for a few days or a few weeks as you're doing that. It's going to be challenging, but you're going to get more clarity of your mind. You're going to get more sustainable energy because you're allowing the body and the mind to cultivate this. But as long as you're dependent on a substance like caffeine, you're not allowing the mind and the body to develop that natural energy. If you do decide to move away from caffeine, you're going to notice withdrawal symptoms. And let this remind you that this is an actual drug. You might notice shakiness. You might notice a dry mouth. You might notice headaches and things like this as you're coming off of the caffeine. This is the withdrawal symptoms. You're going to need to even pay attention to your sugar intake. We've usually learned that by the time we get to adulthood. As children, we ingested a lot of sugar and we would go up into a sugar high and we would crash. Right? This was very common that we would experience this depending on how you were brought up and the things that you ingested. So if you're ingesting a lot of sugar, it can actually produce heedlessness as well. So you might need to look at that. And then some people might tell you that psychedelic substances are actually helping you to get to enlightenment. And this is untrue. What psychedelic substances are doing is it's helping the mind at that particular time to be introspective, but it's based on a substance, right? That only when you're ingesting this substance, you can be introspective and look inward. And then when the substance is gone, you don't have that capability anymore. In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective and inward looking at all times during your day. And there are going to be certain situations that are occurring, and you're going to need to make a decision in that situation, and you're going to need to look inward. Well, if it's only a psychedelic substance that you have the ability to do that with, and you haven't cultivated that naturally in the mind, you're not going to have this introspection available to you at all the different times that you're going to need it in your day and in your week and in your month. So taking psychedelic substances is like window shopping, and you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. You see this beautiful product inside the store that you're looking at through the window, but you can't ever go in and actually touch it and actually experience it because you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. It's the same thing as that psychedelic substances. It kind of promotes and kind of looks like a little bit of what enlightenment is like, is because you're kind of being introspective a little bit, but you can't ever go in and actually touch it and experience it fully because you're chained down by this psychedelic substance. So anytime you hear anything where people are talking about psychedelic substances helping an individual in promoting health or moving someone closer to enlightenment, this is actually untrue. In order to get to that point, you're going to need to cultivate this introspection through your meditation and through your daily reflections and all those kinds of things. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular precept. This is the 5th precept. And by the way, this is the 5th one for a reason, because if you aren't practicing this one, you're going to be more likely to do all the other things, right? So if you take drugs and alcohol and substances, you're more likely to kill, to steal, to have sexual misconduct and lie. If you talk to people who are in prison, they'll talk to you and they'll tell you maybe they're there for murder or they're there for robbing a bank or something like this. But if you really talk to them in depth and ask them, why are you truly here in jail or in prison? They'll tell you it's because of substances, about 80% of them, because they'll say, I would have never murdered that person if I wasn't high on that drug, or I would have never robbed that bank if I didn't have a drug habit and I was trying to fulfill the drug habit. So these substances really cause all kinds of challenges and difficulties in your life because you're more likely to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, and lie. So therefore, if you aren't practicing this precept, all the others are going to kind of fall down on you as well. So let me know what questions you guys have on anything that we've been discussing today or anything else that you would like to talk about. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for your dedication and diligence to learning and practicing the teachings. As you would like to ask questions, you guys know that you can reach out during the classes. You can post in the Facebook group. You can send private messages, or you can schedule personal guidance. I'm always here to help you guys. And next week in our group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 8, which is titled Transforming the Three Poisons, Craving, Anger, and Ignorance. Here we're going to broaden your understanding of what's plaguing the unenlightened mind, and we're going to deepen it and go deeper into understanding these three particular issues in the mind. So far, we've been focusing mainly on craving, but now we're going to go into craving, anger, and ignorance and talk about those. We're not only going to talk about the problems, but we're going to talk about the solutions as well. And then on Wednesday, we're in fourth part of our 4-part series of Buddhist chanting. So you're always welcome to join that as well. So thank you all for joining for today's class. Perhaps we'll see you in a future class. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.